In part 2 of my video series with trumpeter Dave Smith, we return to Sunset Park, Brooklyn, and Dave tells me about his 2 turntables, a Rek-O-Kut and a VPI, and 2 of his favorite records, Miles Davis and John Coltrane live in Stockholm and Mahler's Ninth Symphony.
So this is a Rek-O-Kut idler wheel turntable from about 1956. It's called, the model number is a B12H, and the notable feature about it, and probably the reason I got it, I mean, in its day, it was a high-end table. It was maybe 50% more than a Gerard 301, for example.
Wow.
But the notable feature of it is it has a huge motor. It has a 10-pound motor measured in horsepower. It's a hundredth of a horsepower, but it's a very strong motor, which with the idler wheel contact drives the platter around, and so it's one approach to things, which is use a lot of force to keep the platter moving steadily, no matter what's going on in the groove.
And what does that kind of control give you? Better bass, better time, speed?
Yeah, like transients, like impact of impact of things happening. Whether it's drum beats or things happen with more impact. Yeah, so it has a different kind of feel than like the other table that's a belt drive. They made a few different models of this line, and basically the only difference is the motors. They had 3 different motor options. One was this huge motor. There's another one that has a Pabst motor, which is very similar to what the Thorn's 124 would have, which is an outstanding motor, but smaller.
And what's the arm and cartridge?
So the arm is basically a clone of what Gray Research 108, which is big, heavy. It was kind of a industry standard broadcast tone arm of the day, and it's basically the exact same design principle. And what it is a high mass arm. It's pretty heavy, everything told. And then it's a unipivot, so the whole arm rests on a single needle, but that needle is in the center of a cup that holds silicone grease. Pretty much the whole kind of setup here I got into through this Japanese guy who's sort of well known in Japan, named Sakuma-san, who has I guess a little bit of a cult following in the Japanese sort of philosophy of audio, and also this cartridge, which is a Denon 103R, which is an MC moving coil cartridge, which has been in production for many decades, and probably not spectacular in any one aspect as a cartridge, but it sort of does everything well, and it's not so much about this little aspect here, this little aspect here, but the overall thing is a nice balanced presentation. Up here, this is a VPI HW19 belt drive turntable. It's a Mark II. It would have been made in the early 90s, I think, like 91, 92, something like that. It's a real sort of workhorse table. It's just a really well-made, high-quality table. It's got a big, heavy steel plate for a chassis. It's got a lead-lined platter. Platter's quite heavy with a ring of lead around the outside that gives it a lot of turning momentum. And this was like a modular system where they kind of pioneered this maybe back then, where you could upgrade the platter, you could upgrade this part and that part. And this was what made VPI a successful company. This was the turntable that they built it on. But it's a great table. I really love it. It's has a round belt. It does 33 and 45. It's all totally manual. You just put the belt on a different groove for 45. It's sprung. Sprung suspension. It's loosely based on Linn LP12 table. It's that same kind of suspended approach, which has been a mainstay since the 70s, I guess, since Linn really made it big. But this is like VPI's version of that. It's not really that. It's more of the fact that it's a belt drive sprung table that makes it similar to the Linn. I guess I would say that the VPI, it's a little bit quieter. It has a little bit lower noise floor, and it sounds a little bit more hi-fi-ish, something like that, in a way. But it doesn't quite have the same kind of drive and energy that the Rek-O-Kut has, I guess. I like having both of them. I like having, different approaches in my stuff, because it's fun to check out one thing and then have a contrasting thing to check it out. So, all right, the arm is a Audio-Technica 1005 model, Mark II, and that's like a high-mass, high-quality, Audio-Technica arm, specifically high-mass, which, only certain kinds of cartridges are kind of appropriate for that. Most modern cartridges are not so good for that, but for older cartridges that have a stiffer suspension, you need a higher mass arm to get them to sound good.
That's good.
The cartridge is a Fairchild 225A mono cartridge, which would be from the same period as like most of this stuff, so it would have been mid to late 50s, 56 to 59 or something like that, I think. I mean, Fairchild always was just a no frills, high-end, high-quality company. They just made good stuff, and so this in 1956 or whenever, this would have been one of the best mono cartridges you could buy. So the Fairchild is just a really great old, mono cartridge, mono the way, high quality mono the way it was back in the day, I guess is how I would describe the way it's designed, and I love the way it sounds. I mean, that's a relatively recent thing for me, and it kind of blew me away the first time I heard it. I mean, I have a bunch of mono records, and a lot of them sound pretty good on a stereo table, and the mono stuff sounds pretty good, but it always sounds a little bit dead and a little bit muted, or most of them sound just a little bit lackluster compared to a nice stereo record. But since I've got this, and I mean, mono cartridges, the mono records sound big and full, and there's depth to the sound, and it's really kind of amazing how great it sounds. So I've been really into that recently. So this is Miles Davis and John Coltrane live in Stockholm from 1960, from their sort of famous tour that they took. I have to include this, certainly Miles. I mean, for any jazz musician, I think Miles Davis has to be a major influence, and certainly in my case, he was. To a certain degree as a trumpet player, but especially as a musician, and that musical persona, not so much the antics, but the musical thing that's behind it, definitely has always resonated very deeply with me, as well as everyone else. Certainly John Coltrane I would count among my major influences as well. But this one in particular stands out to me. And this is another one that back when I got it, it was very hard to get. You couldn't, this was issued, it was only first released in the late 80s or early 90s on this Swedish label called Dragon. It was recorded by the Swedish radio. And so it has the sound quality is fantastic. And this is particularly important. So this tour was the last set of performances that John Coltrane did with Miles Davis. And right before the tour, Coltrane told Miles that he was going to quit the band, and Miles sort of convinced him to do the tour. This is the tour that Miles bought him the soprano saxophone and suggested he check out the soprano saxophone. Wow. As like a parting gift. But this is Train when he was looking ahead to forming his own band. And there's a story from the first gig they did on this tour was the night before this night in Paris. The audience was booing because Train was playing like his sheets of sound, and he was doing all this crazy stuff and playing really long solos.
Right.
And like really, really exploring. And the audience was, the audience had just got Cookin' and Relaxin', and these were like records that they were checking out, and then they hear Train doing all this stuff, and they're like, what is this? I guess the producer apologized to him after the concert and said, I'm sorry the fans were so rude to you. You're just going too far for them. And apparently Train's response was, no, I'm not going far enough. This is the second night. This in particular, the John Coltrane solo in Green Dolphin Street is one of my favorite improvisations on recording. It's just incredible. It's him at the peak of him exploring all this stuff, doing all this adventurous harmonic stuff and intensity, and it's really Train is clearly on his way to another level on this record. So I particularly like it, and and Miles sounds, the entire band is incredible. Of course, this is one of the great bands in history. But for me, hearing John Coltrane explore in a way that you don't hear him explore on any record that he recorded previous to this. Some other live records, I'm thinking of like the ones at the Plaza from 59 or 58 or 59. Some of those live ones, there's a little bit of that, but here it's really, he's exploring beyond what he was doing on that. You can hear him like moving into the avant-garde stuff with this and expanding all kinds of sounds on the tenor. In between sets, he does an interview with a Stockholm radio host, and it's cool. To me, it's funny. I love listening to the sound of that interview, like hearing the sound of his voice. The radio, the interviewer's first question. Before we talk about anything, I have to ask you. People say your playing is I'm gonna mess up the quote, but it's something like it's unbeautiful, all these words that say something,
right.
you know, and basically people were reacting to him sounding so crazy.
Right.
And you hear John Coltrane respond in like the calmest, I don't know, the tone of his voice somehow impacts me.
Yeah.
And he just says, well, let me see. You said my playing is what? He says, well, I didn't say that. This is what critics are saying. You know, he says, oh, well, he says, people think that people think I'm angry or something, but I'm not. I'm just trying to find this stuff. It's a great record. It's just, you know, and, you know, double record. There's a bunch of great tunes on it, and they're all, you know, everyone's really stretching out. Mahler wrote so prominently for brass and wrote so many incredible parts for trumpet. So every trumpet player likes Mahler, and I'm a fan of all the Mahler symphonies and have my Mahler section is large. Probably my favorite one musically is this one, the Third Symphony, which it's hard to pick a favorite among them, but this would have to be it. But I picked this record in particular because this one, I mean, I love the Third Symphony. It's amazing work. It's for me, it's, you know, out of the Mahler symphonies, has a certain balance, and there's a profound nature to it that I enjoy. But this particular recording of it stands out very strongly, and so this is Bernstein with New York Phil in '63, I believe. You know, the Third Symphony has there's a famous trumpet solo in the middle, played by Johnny Ware. It's great, it's beautiful. But for me, what this album is about is Bernstein's approach, and particularly the last movement of this symphony, which is, you know, the sixth movement is 25 minutes long.
Wow.
It's an investment to get through this, you know, but it's amazing music. And the sixth movement is 25 minutes, 25 minutes of like deathly slow music, and it's this slow melody that starts with the strings and moves to the brass. There's various brass chorales, and it swells and comes down and swells and comes down, and then in about the 22nd minute it sort of comes together in this enormous peak, and it's funny, like for me, this one moment of when this peak hits is like one of the great moments in recorded music, where the timing, the way it all leads up to it. I mean, you know, Bernstein, I think, was sort of on the more dramatic end of conductors, and he, in my opinion, you know, uses it to good end with this, and the build up, and then when the moment hits, you know, the timing of it is, to me, very exceptional, and it's really powerful after the preceding 20 minutes of like slow build up, and so it's really that whole movement, but really the whole symphony. I mean, especially when you sit, I mean, it takes a lot of time. You got 90 minutes or whatever it is.
Wow.
If you have 90 minutes to sit through the whole symphony, it's an amazing experience.